Hello there, I'm Chris Stashew.
And I'm Mike White.
And this is Father Malone.
And we're the hosts of Dreams for Sale, a Twilight Zone 1985 podcast. Not to be confused with the Twilight Zone 2019, because, let's be honest, at this point, are we confusing that with anything good? On this episode of Dreams for Sale, we are going to be talking about 3 segments from the 8th episode of Twilight Zone 1985, the 8th episode of the first season. And those 3 segments are Act Break, The Burning Man, and Dealer's Choice. So let's get right into Act Break.
Maury Winkler, struggling playwright and occasional bill payer. Maury knows all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. What Maury doesn't know is he's about to take center stage in an off Broadway production in the Twilight Zone.
The entire episode aired November 15th, 1985. Act Break is the first segment. It was directed by Ted Flicker, written by Haskell Barkin, and it stars James Coco, Bob Dishy, and Avery Schreiber. James Coco plays a playwright along with his partner who, man, what a weird episode segment. Like, all of a sudden there's like, oh, I got this thing, and it'll bring me back to life. There's like a wish mechanic and like a pendant on a necklace, and then he goes back in time.
I liked it. I'm a sucker for stuff like this, and I'm a sucker for Avery Schreiber, so as soon as I saw him show up as the fishmonger, I was like, oh, Avery Schreiber, but unfortunately he's not in the episode as much as I would like.
He's not the fishmonger, he's their landlord.
Well, he's also
landlord
a fishmonger.
Landlord.
And a fishmonger.
Is he a fishmonger / landlord, or a landlord / fishmonger?
It's fishmonger / landlord in every case.
Yeah.
Got it. I didn't dislike this segment. I just thought the segment, it takes a really weird left turn, right?
Well, it kind of goes into the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked the introduction of this weird MacGuffin out of nowhere. Like, that was my favorite part of the entire episode. I could take or leave the rest.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing with the pendant is a little jarring. All of a sudden, Bob Dishy's like, "I've got this pendant I got, and I need you to wish me back to life." And James Coco's like, "I want to be the best playwright ever." And it's like, okay,
He wants to work with the best playwright ever.
He could have the best playwright ever as his partner.
Yeah.
Which is weird, considering he can make a wish on anything and not just say, "I want to be the greatest playwright of all time."
Yeah, but then it's weird too, because is Shakespeare actually the greatest playwright? Because he ends up getting almost all of his ideas from James Coco.
I mean,
that is true, but that does play into the whole, did Shakespeare write his own material?
Oh, I haven't seen any of those movies. Didn't Roland Emmerich or one of those guys make a movie like that?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, no,
but that's
no thanks.
That theory has been around forever. And so, with that in mind, because I don't know where I fall on the did Shakespeare do it or did William Marlowe actually write his stuff for him, it felt a little like, Stephen King had a book called 1962 about the Kennedy assassination, which if you want to enjoy that book, you have to wholeheartedly believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. So that was kind of a weird thing in this episode, at least for me, knowing that, was he? Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, what he should have been, his partner, he should have partnered up with Andrew Lloyd Webber, right? I mean, come on, the guy wrote Cats, so clearly the best playwright of all time.
Well, definitely the most successful.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
No, I do like that whole, who wrote Shakespeare, but I mean, I'm not sure that they were going for this then, but
I don't think that they were.
Right, but now it's a thing.
I mean, that's been floating around forever, but I don't think that was the meat of the episode. It was just like the nice ironic twist of, you're not going to be successful in your own time. We're going to put you back here, and then no one will know your name. It will just be Shakespeare that gets remembered. Screw you, James Coco. And I was like, okay, that's a nice Twilight Zone type twist. The nice fate coming to bite him in the ass. I was pretty good with that.
It did feel like an original Twilight Zone.
It did.
Well, and it is based off an original Twilight Zone, or similar to, correct?
I don't know. Which one was that?
To The Bard. I mean,
Yeah,
The Bard has Shakespeare in it. So this is not the first time that they have addressed a Shakespeare story, if that makes sense. But I do like that Shakespeare gets to make a wish at the end, and his wish is like the big F you. It's like, I wish that you would work with me. It's like, oh.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
And then he all of a sudden starts remembering Hamlet from just completely, just out of memory, just everything about Hamlet. He remembers it 100%. I found that hilarious. Because if you can imagine knowing Hamlet, if you've read Hamlet, which a lot of us have, especially, I mean, I had to read the entire thing in high school, like many high school kids in my generation did. Like, imagine knowing that from heart. I'd rather die. Like, it is, the soliloquies alone are, an undertaking to remember, and yet here's poor James Coco having to remember it and transcribe it from memory for a Shakespeare who's essentially prodding him with a stick saying, come on, monkey, move faster. So it's pretty great.
Well, and I think it's not just Hamlet. I think it's every single play.
Right. Well, that's kind of the end conceit, right, is that James Coco will end up writing everything that Shakespeare has ever done.
And I like that as Bob Dishy, who's playing both the partner in the present and then Shakespeare in the past, and the way that, he's so he kind of gets his revenge.
Well, I think it would have felt a little weird if it hadn't have been Bob Dishy, right?
Mm-hmm.
It should have been Avery Schreiber.
Oh, well, that would have felt like a little much, right? Like, that would have felt, that wouldn't have made as much sense.
I actually felt it was a little much with Bob Dishy, honestly.
Yeah, I can see that. But you know what? I'll tell you what, he looks the part. That's for sure. Like, there's something about Bob Dishy as Shakespeare that I don't know, just kind of works. But I like the segment. I mean, look, the issue with the Twilight Zone 1985 is, unlike, say, Twilight Zone 2019 or Twilight Zone 2000 or the original Twilight Zone, is because it is a different format than any of the other versions of the show. None of the other versions of the show ever had an episode broken up into pieces. Because we have that, it allows for these kind of shorter narrative stories. In 2019, they would have blown this up into a fucking 1 hour segment, and it would have sucked.
That's true.
And now you've got, like a 10-minute, 12-minute segment, and it's great because it's to the point, it has an interesting idea, it takes a hard left turn into the Twilight Zone. It's not a mean-spirited episode. It's kind of fun, and at the end of the day, you're like, yeah, it was a fun little story that works in the Twilight Zone. And it's a good way to open up the episode, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely has it going for this, that the notion that we're not going to overstay our welcome, because you're right, like, even if they hadn't done it recently and had it been an hour, if it had been an original segment of the Twilight Zone back in the 60s, a half hour of this would be plotting and awful. Like, this one allows us to just sort of get in, make the point, and get out. So it's stuff. It is only elevated by comparison.
I was just saying, it goes in, it comes out, it's real quick, it's nice and to the point.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I didn't feel wanting at the end, if that makes sense. Like, I didn't feel like I needed more of James Coco and Bob Dishy doing things together. I felt like I saw the entire story from start to finish, and it was a perfectly told tiny little, segment of a show that now has segments that are essentially full episodes that are hours long, and this is a nice little segment, and it wraps up and it tells a nice little story, and we move on to the next segment. And it's got a bit of brevity to it, which I appreciate, because the next segment really doesn't. So, all right, so the second segment of the 8th episode of the Twilight Zone is The Burning Man. So, Burning Man was directed by J.D. Fagelson, written and directed by J.D. Fagelson, and it stars Danny Cooksey, Piper Laurie, Andre Gower, and Robert Blossom. And it is an adaptation of a Ray Bradbury short story of the same name from his collection Long After Midnight. And it focuses on Piper Laurie and Andre Gower as a woman and her nephew taking a road trip or driving in a car in Kansas on a hot summer day, and they come across an old man who is just babbling nonsense, and they decide to give him a ride, and holy shit. It goes from bad to worse to, let's get this guy out of the car, he might murder us, and then the episode ends with, man, you're right back in the same place we started with.
I love Robert Blossom, so I was so happy to see him in this episode.
Yeah, he's always spectacular.
Yeah, and he plays an unhinged kook better than anybody. I mean, as soon as I saw him, I was just like, oh, it's the guy from Christine, and he's so great in Christine. He's so great in everything that he does. I always wanted him to murder Kevin McAllister in the Home Alone movie, but unfortunately, I don't think that happens. So I'm kind of sad about that.
Yeah, he's always spectacular. Yeah, nobody plays an unhinged individual better than him. He's got the look, he's got the demeanor. He's so unusual that he only elevates this particular episode. And I'm not saying it's a bad episode. I actually liked it, but it's better for having him in it.
Well, and they managed to tell in this story something so similar to like a Benjamin Button. But it was just like, okay, we're in and we're out one day. A guy gets born old and goes to a young man and then maybe disappears, maybe commits an evil deed. I don't know. I like that it gives me questions, that it just kind of leaves me wanting a little bit more. It doesn't just beat me over the head with that we break away from that character and go do something else, go do a picnic, and then come back to him later, and then he's played by that creepy kid Sam from Different Strokes, and I think he showed up in Terminator 2. It's just like, yeah. Okay, that kid is super fucking creepy as well. So he's perfectly matched with Robert Splossom.
Yeah, a lot of questions at the end of this episode, but none that felt like you were cheated in any way. Like it left me wanting more, as opposed to me going, "What the fuck just happened?" Which I think is the hallmark of anything by Ray Bradbury. Anyway, it's so hard to adapt Ray Bradbury, but this was a nice. Illustrated man, if you will, of what he was capable of as a writer.
I have to admit that I am sadly lacking in my Bradbury knowledge. Like, I remember seeing the video box cover for the Martian Chronicles like crazy when I was working at Blockbuster. Other than watching Fahrenheit 451, I don't think I've seen much of his stuff.
Well, I would say everybody knows Fahrenheit 451 because I think that has ended up becoming what ostensibly his most famous piece of like literature that is kind of widely referenced and read. I mean, I had to read it in high school, and it's not my favorite thing that he's written, but I think it's the easiest to digest.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's definitely the most sort of forward thinking of his speculative fiction. If I would recommend anything of Bradbury's to anybody, it's always Something Wicked This Way Comes. That is a perfect novel. Just gorgeous. That film, which he wrote the script for, is not great, except it has a central performance by Jonathan Pryce as Mr. Dark, which is just beyond belief how good he is in that. Jason Robards is actually really good in that too, but the movie itself is not worth recommending. The novel, on the other hand, is a piece of beauty, just a real work of art. I think it's the best thing he's ever done, but, who knows?
I forgot that he also did A Sound of Thunder, which was a fantastic Simpsons Treehouse of Horror and a horrible, horrible feature-length film.
I'm honestly surprised that you even brought up the movie, because that movie is... Ben Kingsley was in it for one reason and one reason alone, and that was because he got a paycheck for it.
That whole thing was just so bad. Yeah. Oh, my God.
Oh, really bad.
That movie is an absolute, like, one of the worst movies I've ever seen. It's just such a bizarre movie. But this episode is good. This segment is good, right? I mean, it's interesting. It's got a, like you said, Father Malone. It's got a thing at the end that is, I don't know how to explain it. It's just kind of like, and then this happens. The end.
Yeah, but a complete like, wait, what happened? But again, like, not a what happened. This was stupid kind of a reaction. A genuine curiosity to know what happened and to fill in the blanks yourself, which is rare, particularly in a visual medium that they'll allow you to sort of spin off in your own imagination. So I like this episode a great deal.
Yeah, and that's kind of also rare for something like Twilight Zone, which normally has a pretty, like, definitive ending, the episodes do, right? I mean, the ending's pretty clear, like, okay, act break, he's going to be stuck there writing for Shakespeare, or, Teacher's Aide or Paladin of the Lost Hour, like they all have like a pretty definitive ending, and then you get something like this, which is rather open-ended in a way that was better than I was expecting, because like I said, I didn't know what to expect walking into this segment, and it's short, it's to the point, and again, if it were an hour long, I think we'd have problems, but it's not, and it's 10 minutes, and 10 minutes is more than enough to tell an interesting story. And, like you said, Mike White, it's, Robert Blossom puts in an absolutely amazing performance as a total unhinged lunatic, and that's the best part of the episode. And then you've got that really, like, sinister ending that leaves the door open, and you're just like, oh, God, like, ooh, they're in for it. And they turn around, and it pulls out from the car, and you're just like, well, they're probably dead, or God knows what. But it's just, it's such a fun ending to the episode that I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this little segment to the episode.
Dead or worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it should be noted that the aunt and the nephew, the lake that they're going to frolic in for the day is the same lake from the episode Dreams for Sale.
Oh, very nice.
Same location.
Maybe this is taking place in Dreams for Sale.
I think every episode of this show ought to film at that location because it pays off.
Well, and also when you look at this episode, the way that it's shot is so well done, and it evokes the time and place really well, I feel like. And because I know
it certainly does.
We've had problems with some of the episodes of the show, like feeling like a quote unquote set, and this does not feel like a set. This feels very much time and place. And again, it's nice that it's like a little mini period piece as well.
So much worthier than a lot of the episodes we've been watching recently. So, I wasn't the biggest fan of Act Break, but I thought it was a nice little trifle. I think this was fantastic. I think this episode overall is probably one of the better ones we've got to experience so far.
And on that note, let's talk about the final segment of the episode, Dealer's Choice.
There's an old saying, oft told but seldom heeded. Never deal with the devil. But if by chance you must, it's nice to know he can be a good sport. Just a friendly game of cards among a friendly group of guys who have just come back from the Twilight Zone.
So Dealer's Choice is directed by the master of horror himself, Mr. Wes Craven. It is written by Donald Todd. It stars Morgan Freeman, Dan Hedaya, Barney Martin, Garrett Morris, and everyone's favorite curmudgeon old man, M. Emmett Walsh, as a group of friends who play poker and are joined by a new strange man played by Dan Hedaya, who may or may not be the devil, but he's probably kidnapped Arnold Schwarzenegger's daughter. That's what I think of when I think of Dan Hedaya is when he was in Commando.
For me, it's him yelling at Billy Crystal and Gregory Hines in Running Scared.
That's true, and well, for me, it's Carla Tortelli's husband, Nick Tortelli, on Cheers.
Oh God, he was so good as Nick.
Yeah, man, he was spectacular in that show. Can I just a brief aside about Dan Hedaya? My girl Jess absolutely fucking hates him.
What?
And yeah, just the sight of him, she's just like, oh, he really creeps her out. Having said that, I love Dan Hedaya, and I think he's spectacular in the episode.
He is great. I mean, God, that cast list, I couldn't believe when those names were coming up on screen. I was like, oh, Garrett Morris. Okay, cool. Oh, Dan Hedaya. What? M. Emmett Walsh. Morgan Freeman. What the fuck?
Yeah, what the fuck is going on in this episode? What? How did these planets align?
Yeah, directed by Wes Craven. Oh, okay.
On top of everything else, directed by Wes Craven.
I mean, yeah, it's back to that very first episode, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that this is one of the best segments I've seen of the show so far. I'm not going to say the best, but one of the best.
I wholeheartedly agree. It's a nice, simple story. There's some good twists to it. It's that whole, playing with your fate and all that. I really appreciate what's going on in this. And I thought, okay, it might be going a little too long, but then the rest of it comes along, and I was like, yep, I'm here for the full ride.
I just, you could have made this episode longer as far as I'm concerned. These actors together on screen doing anything is going to interest me. Never mind having a good story behind them and good characters. And, I don't know. This entire episode is a win as far as I can tell. It's weird that sometimes that we have a little grab bag of a pretty good segment and an okay segment and a really good segment. And then on occasion we get one that just powers through from beginning to end. It is enjoyable.
Well, and it also has some stakes for being like a slightly comedic or more than slightly comedic episode or segment. There are some stakes to it. As much as M. Emmett Walsh is an old curmudgeon-y bastard, which, I mean, that's like what he ends up being known for in the things that I've seen him in. A little name drop, a little bit of Fletch, Tales from the Crypt. I've seen he's always plays that kind of same character, and here he plays that character as well, but at the same time he does it so well, and he is sympathetic in a way, and there are some stakes to this episode that I frankly wasn't expecting.
It's funny, as I was watching this, I kept thinking of actually another episode of this Twilight Zone that we won't get to until, I guess it's episode 12. There's another devil one with Ron Glass and Sherman Helmsley. So I'm very curious, like, once we get there, if we'll be like, oh yeah, this is pretty similar or not. But I'll kind of leave that. I'll just tease that in this episode, and then we'll talk again in 4 months and see if we agree or not.
Hell is a place that looks remarkably like Cleveland. I think that's the episode you're talking about.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Or is it Newark? No, I'm sorry, not Cleveland. It's Newark.
Yeah, you're right.
I don't know. I don't really have any criticisms of this episode. This is a total win as far as I'm concerned. It's so hard for a speculative show to do a comedy episode and have the comedy be funny and have the tone of not only the way the actors are playing it, but the way it's directed and scored to pull it off as skillfully as they do here. It was it's remarkable, and coupled with the fact that, as you said, Chris, there are actual stakes in this episode. It isn't just a trifle, and we care about these guys as short as a time as we're given to do so. I don't know. This is a marvelous episode,
and the performances are great as well.
Yeah, I was really very happy with the one actor who I didn't mention earlier, who was Barney Martin, who was just, I like that he's the dumb guy of the group, but they know that he is, and his jokes don't land, and just that his naivete is what ends up saving them all, I thought was fantastic.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Barney Martin, most people know him as Jerry Seinfeld's dad on Seinfeld.
Right. He seems like he would have been perfect. I know he wasn't, but it seems like he would have been perfect to be playing cards with, not Felix, but the other one, from The Odd Couple, when he would have all of his card games and he had like those great faces around the card table. It seems like Barney Martin would have been great.
Oh my God, he would have fit right in there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
A little before your time, Chris.
How great is Morgan Freeman in this episode?
Really great, loose, and fun. Like exactly what he has not cultivated in the past 25 years or so. Like a real world human being.
Yeah, which is funny because normally he's on the other side of the table and he's playing God. And
man, how would you just get cast one time in a movie and that's all you're ever known for from then on?
I don't know, but he's sure
hyper typecasting.
I mean, even if he's not God, he's the voice of God, and he's giving the voice of God narration.
Yeah, Morgan Freeman has always been an easy reader to me from the television series Electric Company when we were kids.
Oh yeah, yep. Yeah, where he was super hip and super cool. And
oh man, he was the coolest.
Oh yeah. And yeah, he has what you said, he's loose in this episode, and he has those comic chops that you don't necessarily see as much anymore, where now he's just like the straight man to fucking Jack Nicholson or something. And it's like, no, he can actually play this comic stuff, and he's really good at it.
Yeah, it makes me wish that he had done more comedy because he's really good.
And then speaking of comedy, Garrett Morris, who...
Oh, I know, man. Always welcome to see Garrett Morris.
Yeah, I completely agree. He is so underutilized across his career. I don't know why he is not more popular than he is.
Yeah, I don't get it either, man. Like, he got kind of shuffled to one side back on the SNL days, but that's just because he was surrounded by a team of powerhouses. But he really held his own. And, it is a bit shocking to me that he was not able to parlay that into more because he's always welcome whenever he's on screen. By the end, the writers were only giving him effectively women roles, and nobody really was writing for a black performer. And he was kind of losing his mind at the end, and I think that was partially cocaine fueled, but at the same time, I believe at the end he was screaming about invisible men in his pocket. So, it was nothing on air that occurred, but when most of the cast left, he left rather willingly. Yeah, I'm a big SNL nerd.
Yeah, which is good. Somebody's got to be.
Mm-hmm. Might as well be me.
I like this segment a lot more than, like we said, a lot more than most things we've seen. And it is, the flow of these three is so good that...
Yeah, kudos to whoever put this particular bunch together. We're obviously eventually going to get to this interview we did with Rock O'Bannon, but he said they were constantly sort of swapping in what could work and what could not work. In this case, kudos whoever put these three segments together. You did a great job.
Yeah, this was finally, again, I'm trying to remember the last really solid one that we talked about. Maybe episode 2? And so, yeah, it's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months of just kind of meh. So this one really was just a great palate cleanser.
And I hope that from here we get some better episodes.
Well, Shadow Man's coming in 2 more months.
Shadow Man is coming.
God, I'm so excited.
Me too.
Wong's Lost and Found Emporium is next month.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, because the next episode is split into 2 parts. Dead Woman's Shoes and Wong's Lost and Found Emporium.
And with Dead Woman's Shoes, I think that's a remake of an old Charles Beaumont written episode.
It sure is.
It is. Now with Helen Mirren.
So now I'll have to go back and watch the original.
And Jeffrey Tambor.
Oh, everyone's favorite.
Didn't I just see him as a really disgustingly fat person? Oh, that's a different show.
Did. That is a different show. And speaking of that different show, where can people find you when you're not on Dreams for Sale, Father Malone?
You can always find me on my YouTube channel, Odd5 Films, and check out my show You've Never Seen. You can also hear me on another podcast called Chronicles from the Crypt, about the HBO television series Tales from the Crypt. And evidently, I'm kind of a permanent guest host on the Culture Cast, I think.
Yes, you and Mike White.
Oh my God, what a trio we are.
Speaking of Mike White, where can people find you, Mike White, when you are not on Dreams for Sale?
When I'm not on Dreams for Sale, I am talking about Kolchak with you, Chris, over at the Kolchak Tapes, which is a monthly podcast looking at the Night Stalker old and new, and, well, newish, 2005. Jesus Christ, I'm so old. And I also do a little podcast called The Projection Booth, which you can find at projectionboothpodcast.com, but if you don't listen to it, that's fine. I'm okay.
Do you still have jessescatpictures.com?
Yeah. Well, that and jessesfeet.com. It's a webcam site. I don't think she knows about it, so don't tell her.
I won't tell her. This is in reference to our Twilight Zone 2019 second bonus episode. If you don't know what we're talking about, go listen to that and come back. And if you're listening to this, Jess, Mike is a pervert.
Mike, not Father Malone.